Hey, I'm back. Thanks so much for sticking around. So, DBT in schools, a good idea as an early intervention approach or a source of potential harm? A recent study suggests that teaching dialectical behaviour therapy skills, so DBT skills, universally in schools may actually make things worse for students. Yep, you heard that right. Increase anxiety, increase depression, and worse parent-child relationships were not what was expected. But before we send DBT to detention, let's take a closer look at this study because I see this one coming up regularly and being talked about, so it's worth exploring it a little bit further. Now, this isn't going to be a deep dive into the statistics and the minutiae of detail, but more of a hopefully easy to follow overview of the findings. So let's start with what actually happened in the study. Well, researchers tested an 8-week DBT skills program with each session lasting about an hour, which they called Wise Teens, with over 1,000 students between the two groups. About half of the students got the DBT training, whilst the other half carried on with their usual classes, which in this case was health and physical education. Children were aged between 13 and 14 years old and were pretty much evenly split between men and female. And they took measurements at baseline, so before any intervention, immediately after the group had finished at the end of the 8 weeks, and at 6 months as follow-up. So immediately post-intervention, so meaning after the last session of the 8-week course, those in the Wise Teens group, so the group receiving the DBT skills, reported significantly greater total difficulties overall, poorer quality of parent-child relationships, increased depression, anxiety, and emotional dysregulation, and lower emotional awareness and quality of life relative to the group without the intervention. At 6 months follow-up, the authors found that most of the differences between the two groups had dissipated. However, they still found that those from the Wise Teens group continued to report significant poorer parent-child relationship compared with the other group. Now, this sounds really odd, right? DBT is one of the gold standard treatments for emotional dysregulation. So what went wrong? Well, there's a few possibilities that we can consider. DBT was originally created for people experiencing severe emotional dysregulation. When you apply it universally, you're teaching these techniques to a mix of people, some who need it and some who don't. For students who weren't struggling emotionally, being asked to focus so much on their emotions may have increased self-focus and distress rather than actually helping them. One of the study's biggest findings was that students in the DBT group became more aware of their emotions, but didn't necessarily feel more equipped to manage them. This is seen in other school-based interventions, such as in mindfulness programs, where students become more tuned into their emotions, but without the right tools or support, they actually feel worse. And it's important to notice that only about 30%, that's 30% of students practiced DBT skills in between the weekly sessions. And guess what? The ones who did actually had better outcomes. This tells us that sitting through DBT lessons isn't enough without real-world practice. And also, these kids are 13 and 14 years old. Maybe it was just too complicated for them. Asking them to do this in an independent way without a ton of support in place might not have worked as expected. Plus, maybe cramming a lot of new stuff for them into just 8 weeks was way too much, too fast, and they felt overwhelmed and overloaded with information. But it does show that for some of the kids, it was helpful. And they were still benefiting 6 months later, which is really encouraging to hear. It makes me think of learning a musical instrument. You can't just go to a couple of lessons and expect to be amazing. It takes practice and dedication. And even then, some people pick it up faster than others. And then there was this other finding that the Wise Teen group were still reporting worse relationships with their parents 6 months later compared with the control group. One thought here is that the program could have increased conflict at home by bringing up these difficult emotions without having a solid family support system in place. It's like giving someone a torch to explore a dark room, but not telling them what they might find in there. They could get scared. They might uncover things they weren't ready for, and without the right support, that could lead to more anxiety. So it really highlights the importance of involving families or carers in any kind of mental health intervention for teenagers. So what does this mean moving forward? Does this mean that DBT in schools is a bad idea? and we should never use it? Well, one study, no matter how well designed, is never enough to make broad decisions about clinical practice. There are other studies out there suggesting that DBT skills can be helpful in school settings, but context matters. So moving forward, we need to be asking, who is this for? Maybe DBT should be targeted to students who actually need it, rather than given to everyone. How is it taught? If it's going to be taught in schools, then it needs to be engaging, it needs to be relevant and connected to real life situations. Should parents be involved? Many DBT programs with children also include parents. Maybe that is something that was really missing here. Then there are other considerations like, what is the best length for a program like Wise Teens? What's the ideal format in how it should be delivered? How do we more appropriately involve family or carers? The more we learn about how to do this right, the more we can help kids build resilience and psychological flexibility and skills that might help them through difficult times. So if you're listening and you feel a little discouraged by the findings of this study, then don't be. Yes, there's some work to do. The approach needs to be refined, and this gives a good idea of what changes need to be made. So there we go. I hope you found this video helpful. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.